started with the next judicial case, Justice of the Peace, Township 3. Closest to me is Sean Connell. Judge Marshall is the farthest on my left. Also, I would like the candidates to know, and Judge Marshall, no, I did not vote, I was moderating. We do have some time here, not as much time as we did with Ms. Levy, who was up there just asking a lot of questions. So we'll try to keep things moving along. And what we'll do is take a few minutes to allow you to introduce yourself. We'll start with Judge Marshall.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Thank you for service to our country. I appreciate it. I am Justice of the Peace, Las Vegas Court, Las Vegas Justice Court Department 3. I have been on the bench for, this is my 6th year. I ran for re-election 6 years ago. Before that, I practiced law here in Las Vegas. I started out as the first death penalty law clerk for the United States District Court. I did that for 2 years. I was stationed in Reno, but worked for all the federal judges. After that, I came down. I was asked to become clerk for Roger Foley. I was his last federal law clerk. Last federal law clerk. And then I went into private practice. I primarily practiced litigation in a variety of areas. I defended a police officer in 1983 actions, wrongful shooting cases in federal court. I defended firefighters in the Airtech fire. I represented business and individuals, business litigation, personal injury, across the board. Even in the last couple of years before running for judge, I was in bankruptcy court on the Lake of Las Vegas, bankruptcy, and the Jim Roads. I'm a well-balanced attorney, having practiced both civil and criminal, and having now presided over both civil and criminal calendars for the last 5 years. I grew up in Northern California, and someone told me when I was at UC Davis, if you could learn Chinese, you could learn anything. So I studied Chinese, and after UC Davis, I lived in Taipei, Taiwan, where I studied Chinese and I taught English. 我的中文名字是马世坚，现在我住在 Las Vegas. My Chinese name is Ma Shijian, and I live in Las Vegas. I'm very passionate about the community that I live in. My 5 years on the bench have exposed me to a lot of concerns that veterans have, in particular homelessness, mental health problems, addiction problems. I've learned over the last 5 years, both from my civil and my criminal calendar. When you put somebody in jail and they have those problems, they continue with those problems. When you don't do anything to affect change to those conditions, when they come out, they're going to be in the same pattern, same thing. So some of the things I've worked on in the past 5 years are addressing those issues because you shouldn't be punishing someone for mental health problems, for homelessness. And there are better ways to deal with addiction than throwing everybody in jail and keeping them in there. Because eventually, unless it's a significant crime, you're going to get out of jail, and you still have to have a place to live and a job. So those things have been things that I've worked on over the last 5 years. Thank you.
Mr. Connell?
My name is Sean Connell. I'm also running for Justice Court Department 3. I've lived in Las Vegas since 2000. I originally grew up in Iowa and went to Marquette University in Milwaukee for undergrad, went back to the University of Iowa for law school, graduated from Iowa with distinction in 2000, and then passed the 2000 bar exam. In the last 16 years, I have practiced in almost every area of law. I do also have civil and criminal background. I've done family law, I've done bankruptcy, handled a number of labor law cases. So I'm also very diverse as far as the background and experience that I would bring to the job. Being a judge is something I've always wanted to do, and it's something I'm dedicated to being good at. I know that I have the experience and qualifications to be benefit to the members of Clark County. In addition to all of the qualifications and background as far as my diverse practice areas, I've also been honored to receive some awards recently. I was named Nevada Legal Elite, also named one of the top 100 litigators. I think that I definitely have the qualifications and would love to have the opportunity to do the job. In addition to my legal practice, I'm also involved in the community. Done a number of things to help out with abandoned and rescued animals. I've got friends that run an organization that I've done pro bono work for. I've also worked with some organizations that set up out front pet shops and try and adopt animals out. I volunteered with youth sports. I played volleyball in college, so it's something that I was good at, something I knew something about. When I got to town, met a lot of coaches, both in the high schools and club teams, so I volunteered my time to go and work with their kids and try and help them learn the techniques that I had picked up in my years of playing. I've also joined the board of a veterans charity and volunteer my time for that. called USA Cares. Not sure if anyone's familiar with it, but I'd be happy to tell you all about it some other time.
And what we've done before is I guess going down the line, so to say, the question. So is there any particular panels that would like to start?
I can start. Hi, my name is Monty Levy. Just for everyone's information, I have to abstain in this race. Both Janiece Marshall and Herman Letitia, who's not present today, but who's also in this race, are friends of mine. And my name does appear as a supporter on Judge Marshall's letterhead, so I was told that I have to abstain in this race. That being said, I am allowed to ask questions. So I'm going to ask a question to Judge Marshall. The last legislative session, I know that you testified against a bill, AB 193 in its entirety, and you also sent a letter of opposition to the legislature. Can you please explain, and probably a lot of the panelists might not know what AB 193 is. I'm also in the unique position that I've appeared in front of every single Justice Court judge, and I think nobody else on the panel today can say that. So if you could explain exactly what AB 193 was, and what your position is in allowing hearsay evidence alone to hold a defendant to stand trial on felony charges, and because it only passed in a limited scope, if new legislation is proposed to expand the law, allowing the hearsay of an alleged victim at preliminary hearings to include all types of offenses, would you still be opposed to it, and why?
So I didn't actually testify against it. They did not allow, there were judges present, but we were not permitted to testify. The public defender, Mr. Cohn, and the DA's, Mr. Wolfson, testified. My concern with 193 in its original form, and to some extent still in its existing form, is the fact that we do not have an opportunity as a judge to make a determination of credibility of a witness, a victim, when they're testifying under certain circumstances, child rape victim, and the fact that you then are listening to layers, possibly layers of hearsay. So for example, you could have no one directly involved in what the alleged crime that occurred against a victim, and only police officers testifying. It can be 4 levels or more of hearsay, where one officer has told another officer what a witness or another officer told that officer, and then it is reduced down to a report by one officer. They could have anyone from the police department come in with that report and testify, no one having any personal knowledge whatsoever about the actual facts of the case. And that's a concern for a judge. As Justice of the Peace, we preside over the preliminary hearing of gross misdemeanor, and we preside over the misdemeanor trial as the trier of fact and law. And so in order to make a determination if what has happened, it is obviously very helpful to hear the people directly involved from their own mouths what occurred. As a more personal level, as a judge, I was threatened, and I had to testify at a preliminary hearing. And for me, despite the fact that I presided over thousands at this point of trials and preliminary hearings, it was still nervous to testify and to talk about. Yes, that did concern me when someone threatened to hang me and let the body sway to noon. But what I did learn from the experience was the longer that I was testifying, it empowered me as victim, that I got to address the person and explain why that did concern me. So those are my concerns about the law. I'm not, right now it is in place, and I am required to utilize it to the extent that I do not think that I have sufficient evidence to make determinations of what actually occurred. Then it is my obligation as a judge to find that there would not be sufficient evidence. But it is concerned, and that's concerned. What I have noticed is the DAs that are actually trying the case actually do not rely upon the new law. They still call their witnesses and their victims at the preliminary hearing stage. There's been only one instance where DAs used it, and they did actually end up bringing in the person who interviewed the minor child. So the good news is that the DAs that are actually trying the case, they want their victims and witnesses to testify in court so that the judges can make that determination of what went on and make sure that the rights are protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Marshall.
Mr. Connell, would you like to answer? Are you familiar with the law? So,
I am, and I generally am not in favor of the law. law. I do understand that there's some concern about protecting victims, but I also think that it's kind of a tenet of justice that you've got the right to confront your accusers, and to allow hearsay, it does undermine the ability to judge the credibility of the witness, as well as any type of cross-examination. So while it's in place, judges are required to follow it, and it's not their decision to strike the legislation, but there's nothing that prevents judges from continuing to lobby against it, and I think that would be a good cause.
I'm going to start by saying that I'm a huge supporter of the Veterans Court and of course dealing with veterans and issues of homelessness and so forth.
Please state your name.
My name is Robert Lauer. I'm a veteran. I'm also a property manager in real estate. And so my question is for both of you, but specifically for Judge Marshall regarding your comment about homeless people with mental issues. And I understand that. However, there's another side, and I'd like to get your perspective on, from our side, we're buying a shopping center, spending millions of dollars refurbishing it, and we have homeless people who sleep on the sidewalk in front of the businesses. We've asked the cops to come by and remove them. They don't, or they do, and they're gone. They're back in an hour. And so there's no deterrent from them causing damages to our business, costing us money when we're trying to create jobs and clean up shopping centers that are empty and create business opportunities for people. And so it's a real problem having these homeless people who don't respect the law, and the law is not enforced. As far as I can see, they keep coming back, the same ones.
And I do appreciate your concern. I represented 4 city enterprises who built Showcase Mall, Gallery Mall, Seven Hills, and it's a big concern for a business because you do have to protect your property and you want your clients, customers to feel comfortable walking into the front door. So one of the things I have worked on since I've been on the bench is because I saw the pattern in first year I had criminal, second year I had civil, and I would see the same people in both of my dockets. And what I learned is that, and veterans are a big portion of this, they are homeless. Whether they have mental health problems, they don't have family support, or they just have not been able to bridge their military experience to come back in and integrate it back into society. And it's an important thing that we need to address as a society. We do have Veterans Court in Las Vegas Justice Court, District Court has Veterans Court. One thing I've worked on to try to do is create reintegration housing, where we do know that we have a high percentage of misdemeanors. These are people that are committing misdemeanor crimes, like loitering in public, sleeping in public, panhandling, those type of things. We have an 80% recidivism rate. They keep coming back around. One day they'll be in a shelter, the next day they'll be in criminal court. They might get off the street into a residence, and then they'll be evicted because they can't pay for it because they can't maintain a job. So we need to address those issues at the core, which is if they have mental health problems, we need to provide mental health treatment, direct them to resources. There are resources, but you need to direct them to it and make sure they have the means to continue accessing it. And also you can make sure if there's a suspended sentence over their head that they keep going and doing it, because study in my experience shows if you have both a helping hand and also a suspended sentence, some consequence if they don't complete the requirements. I also worked with retailers and I went pre-adjudication for shoplifting and the 8 misdemeanor offenses that can be committed on a commercial property. To rather than have Metro go down on those low-level crimes on shoplifting, we're not talking about the rings, we're talking about spur of the moment, let's steal something, we're talking about people that are stealing for food, shampoo, things of that nature. I created a diversion program working with Metro, the District Attorney's Office, and the retailers. It is called the RAD program, and it piggybacks off of the summons in lieu of arrest. So Metro doesn't have to spend its time going down on shoplifting calls, which is usually low priority, so 3 or 4 hours. Retailers have to have 2 employees sit with an offender for several hours until Metro arrives. So I designed the program that as long as they meet the requirements, no active warrant and valid ID, they are diverted to the Neighborhood Justice Center where they have to complete requirements, whether it is find a job, get duplicate identification, get stable living, go to U.S. Vets or other veterans program to get them functioning back in society. If they do those things, they are never charged with the misdemeanor offense, they're never arrested. They complete the requirements, they can only do it one, it's one and done. And then the retailer does not have to pursue the prosecution, doesn't have to send its people down to court to testify or wait down there for a case to be negotiated, any of that process. Instead, the person has to deal with the consequence of their actions, but they do it in some productive manner. And then the retailer has the option. If they're successful, the retailer just throws away. If they're not, then the retailer has the option if they still want to pursue prosecution. But it's saved tremendous time and money. I've had over 400 people go through the program at this point, and there have been only 6 reoffenses. 4 of them were drug related, only 2 shoplifting. So there are things that we can do, but we do need to address the problem at its root. Just throwing people in jail over and over again is not going to solve your problem because they're going to be back as soon as they get out of jail.
And I do appreciate the fact that you brought up there are 2 sides. All too often when you've got something like homelessness, evictions, those types of things, people focus on the individuals that are the defendants, and sometimes they feel bad for them, but the laws are in place to protect everyone the same. So if you had complied with the law and you're entitled to a remedy, you should get it. Now, emotions need to be taken out of the decision, but that doesn't mean that we have to lack empathy. And I think that you do have to consider what the best punishment is, because obviously the goal is to punish them, deter them, and whenever possible, rehabilitate them. So if there are treatment programs that are available, if there is some type of diversion program that's available, where you can try and get that individual help to try and prevent them from just reappearing in the same place over and over again, it's worth exploring it. But as a member of the community, whether it's a commercial entity or not, you are entitled to protection from the law, so the laws need to be upheld, and that's something that I obviously know to do.
And just a quick reminder before Brian's question is, because we do have a lot of questions left, we have a half hour for our next interview. We'll try to keep the answers down to a minute, but we'll see how it goes. We'll be flexible.
Thank you, Tony. This question is for Mr. Connell. My name is Brian Clark. I'm a 26-year lawyer here in Southern Nevada. Rarely do I appear in justice court, so I'm not really familiar with all the procedures there. But can you tell me why you picked this department and what you believe you can bring to the table that might enhance Department 3?
Well, I looked at all of the races that were up for re-election this year, because being a judge is something that I am dedicated to doing. So I had to look and see what was available. After doing so, narrowed it down to a couple of choices. I think I was down to 2 or 3 departments that I considered running in. And then I looked at who the incumbents were in that department, as well as who the other challengers were in that department, and eventually I settled on Department 3. I do not know Ms. Marshall. We've met maybe 2 or 3 times, but I've looked at all of the resources that are available as far as the Review Journal and other independent organizations that rank judges, talked to a number of friends that appear before her on a regular basis and listened to their concerns, and decided that there are things that could be done to improve the department. One of the biggest things is obviously improving on efficiency. I know that all of the judges have a very full calendar, but I think we have to be willing to consider changing things up and not continuing to do things the same way just because that's the way it's always been done. For instance, an idea is to split up the calendar. You know, at 8:30 you have a cattle call and everybody shows up, waits for their turn, whereas you can try and figure out ways to break up those groups. Obviously, when you've got people that are in custody, they're all being brought over together, so they're probably all going to be placed on the calendar at the same time. When you've got pro per defendants, they can be calendared at a different time, so that you're not clogging up the courtroom with all the cases just waiting one after another. I know a lot of judges don't like to do that because when you get through one case, you want the next one to be there ready to go. But if you do have a break, whether it's 20 minutes, an hour before your next calendar is going to start up, there's always work to be done. So whether it's reviewing motions, whether it's signing orders, you can find ways to be productive that doesn't require other people to be sitting around waiting for you to get to their case.
Just a quick follow-up. That was a general response. Do you find that lack of efficiency in the entire justice court system, or particularly in Department 3?
I guess I would say both.
May I respond?
Well, he's the moderator.
Well, the question was directed to Sean, but sure, Brian, if you want to modify the question.
I can respond directly to the efficiency. I have actually modified my calendar over time to to actually set different calendars starting. So for example, I do my in-custodies at 8 o'clock. I do out-of-custody at 8:30. I set afternoon appearances. I set trials, prelims to start at noon and 1 o'clock. I encourage that because I'm there all day long. I believe being a judge is an all-day long job. You do have to balance the DAs and public defenders and their schedules, and you also have to balance the correctional officers. So I look at the entire system. I also look at either negotiating or going forward with the preliminary hearing or trial, so there's not continuance after continuance. It does take longer to resolve case at the front end, instead of keeping everybody in custody for 15 days for the preliminary hearing and then the trial. So my courts, I actually require the DAs to make the offers, if they're going to make an offer, to make it available first thing in the morning, and then the attorneys have the opportunity to speak to the client, negotiate it. So I have more cases that resolve at the first appearance, rather than continuing the person staying in custody until the 15 days until the preliminary hearing. So what may be more time on the front end saves the back end. So in my department, what you might consider as an efficiency is actually more efficient for the entire system, because I'm looking at the entire system, the individual, as well as how long we're going to pay as taxpayers for to be in jail, because it's $145 a night for a defendant to be in jail. And if the case is going to be the type of case, a misdemeanor case that's going to be resolved, but they're likely not going to spend jail time unless they don't complete the requirements, the sooner that case is negotiated or gone to trial, then the more money and the better off the defendant as well, because they have a resolution of their case. So you can pay it on the front end and spend a little bit more time, or you can pay a lot more on the back end. People staying in custody going to trial, district court 2 or 3 years later. So it's a balance, and I think more cases should be resolved at the justice court level. I think it's also extremely important as individuals that their right to their day in court, to have their motions for bail heard at the first appearance, for the attorneys to make arguments. And if that takes a few more minutes, then that's my job to hear. It's not my job to run people in and out of court without their day in court. I think it's very important. I think it's important for the integrity of our judicial system that people know that when they come in court, they get to have their case heard. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nathan Atkins, and I'm former U.S. Army. My question is about you as an individual, right? As a public servant, you have an obligation to the community, like every citizen, right? And so, how are you going to use your profession as well as your personal ability to improve Clark County, Las Vegas for veterans? There's all types of rankings out there, but one of them says that, you know, Henderson, North Las Vegas, those type of places, right? They have the low income veterans, right? We rank very, very poorly in that. What are you going to do to make our community better from the bench and as well as outside of the bench? I'll start with you.
Well, on a professional level, obviously, when you're in court, you need to make sure that you're applying laws fairly and you're serving the community as the best judge you can be. But then also on a personal level, like I said, I do volunteer on the board for a veterans charity, and through that, I've gotten in contact with a lot of different veterans organizations. So I would continue in my personal life to try and serve in a charitable way, working with organizations, trying to make sure that we can gather and provide resources to the individuals that need them, whether that is housing, whether that's counseling, or legal services as well.
So I previously responded to one of my long-winded answers, I guess, with respect to my work towards reintegration housing, which is one of the goals, is to provide housing that people can afford it. I worked with Clark County Detention Center to apply for federal grants for homeless, and we have been successful in obtaining those grants so that we can provide housing for, and a lot of the homeless are veterans. And if they are not in the veteran system, then there are resources. Even if they're homeless, we still have provided housing through those grants. But I think it's very important that when an individual appears in front of you, you find out what it is, why they committed, if they committed the crime, why they did it, and understand that. It does no good to sentence everybody $500 fine and do online counseling if they don't have an ID, if they don't have a home, if they have mental health problems or addiction problems. I try to work on a sentence that make sense for the individual, that going to make them productive, so they're paying into our tax base and we're not paying for them. And one of the things that you have to look at is they're not going to be able to pay a fine or do community service if they're homeless. So I start with the basics, and I created a diversion program, different programs to address those things, because you still have to have consequences for their action, because you just can't credit for time served and then they're back on the streets. It's a pointless system if we continue doing that. So we need to look at the individuals, and we also need to make them responsible for their actions. There have to be consequences. And if they are doing things where they have to get a home, they have to apply for benefits, they have to get counseling that's suitable for them, whether it's veteran or addiction, whatever the case may be, you need to make sure that their sentence, if you can, deals with those problems. And then you have the suspended sentence if they don't do it. And having both has proven to be quite effective. I've had many of my cases where the defendant completes the requirement, moves on with their life, now is a job and life, as opposed to just imposing a suspended sentence, and then you see him back a couple weeks later.
Jim Jonas, co-host of Veterans in Politics. Thank you both for coming in on a Saturday. I know it's probably not the funnest thing to do, but when you decided to run for office, you kind of expect that this was going to happen at some point. So one of the things, and I want to be very careful about how I answer this question, because I'm not accusing, I don't want to deal with corruption, okay? But in our mission statement, part of the job is to expose corruption, or the way I'm looking at it is potential corruption here. I'm always a little concerned when anybody will be willing to take a job where they make less money than their current job, but yield more power. So how can, and this is both of you, whichever order you guys want to take it in, how can you assure us at Veterans in Politics that you're not doing it just simply for the power that your position yields, but for the good of the community?
Well, unfortunately, it's something that you're going to have to take it on faith when I tell you, because I can't prove it to you until I'm given the opportunity. But one of the reasons that I'm running is because I am dedicated to fairness, and I can't tolerate corruption, and not even just corruption, but again, the appearance. Any appearance of impropriety undermines the justice system. Whether it's the judges, whether it's the district attorney's office, whether it's public defender, people not timely turning over evidence, if it's intentional, it's an oversight, anything like that, it undermines the public's faith in the judicial system. And we need to make sure that we restore that faith. So I can just tell you that I am completely dedicated to avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. You know, one of the things you talk about, maybe recusing yourself from a case, anything like that, even if the judge doesn't have a conflict, if someone can view it as a conflict, I think that you have an obligation to recuse yourself. We need to make sure that we are above any type of approach and just, again, even the appearance of impropriety. So I would just tell you that it's something that I'm dedicated to, it's something I would do my best to uphold, but again, it's taken on faith because there's no way that I can pull out some statistics or facts or anything to support that. I just know in my heart who I am as a person, and I will stay true to that.
So I've, throughout my legal career, I've actually sat on the Southern Nevada Disciplinary Committee where we self-discipline lawyers to make sure that we are following the rules. It's an important part of being a judge and a lawyer that you also follow the rules. I was also appointed to the Standing Committee on Judicial Ethics and Campaign Practices, which I volunteered for 7 years before I ran for judge, and as judge, the Nevada Supreme Court appointed me to the Judicial Commission, which is overseeing that judges follow the rules. It's a very important part of the practice. I did take a pay cut to take this job, but I won't get a pay raise for keeping the job. But there is more than money that is important for work satisfaction. And being a public servant is actually very rewarding. And if you have volunteered and been in the military, you know that you do things, work much harder when you have a more meaningful purpose, and you sacrifice a lot more, even though you're not getting paid what your skill set would be if you're in private practice. So I know, having spent 20 years working for law firms, and also the last last 6 years working as a judge, that job satisfaction is equally important as monetary. And I think it is very important that our judiciary make sure that we are above reproach, that we make sure we follow the rules, and that we do so with integrity. So it's important to me. Thank you.
I apologize, just to add one thing, I know there was a monetary component of your question, and I didn't address that at all, and that's because the monetary issue never really entered my mind.
Thank you both very much.
Hi, I'm Tim Patara. So my question is for you, Judge Marshall. So given the, I'm sorry, wrong question. So here's the real question. So I've also lived overseas for a period of time, and I find that very interesting, the fact that the area you were in is very interesting as well. Given the time, your time overseas, do you feel that is a positive or negative on your judgment or the way you go about being a judge? Having been in that different society, different culture, do you think it affects in a positive or negative light?
I think anytime you can travel overseas that you should. I encourage that, especially when you're younger. I went to Taiwan with, I think I had $1,000 of a return plane ticket. I stayed at a youth hostel the first 3 weeks, and then I lived with the family and taught English and studied at Shida. And then I went back after law school and worked for a law firm, drafting joint venture agreements. What I think that living overseas taught me is that the cultures are very different, and what one might interpret as behavior by American standards may be very different from an Asian perspective or even European perspective. There are things that you need to be aware of, and when someone is appearing in front of you, they may act a certain way and their body language may indicate something, but when you actually put all that aside, because you can't judge someone on what they say or how they're saying it or how they're holding their body, they just may not know any better. But different cultures respond different ways. It's a very important part to make sure that you do not judge people inappropriately because they're doing something that you wouldn't think would be the normal behavior. And I see that with different cultures, the way perhaps they may not speak up as much to defend themselves, but that doesn't mean that they don't feel that they're innocent or how they answer a question. I also found the language barriers very significant in courtrooms, and that you need to make sure that they fully understand English, not that they just can speak it, but also that they can hear it, make sure that there's an interpreter available if there is any question at all that they don't understand it. Because we do have many diverse cultures here and languages in here in Las Vegas. It is very important that you do understand that when someone appears in front of you.
Thank you. I'll let you add if you want to.
Never lived overseas for an extended period of time. I did travel during school on a couple different occasions and spent some time in Europe as well as Central America. Obviously, I think there's a benefit to exposing yourself to as much as possible just to see what's out there, but I don't know that it necessarily is going to impact the way I approach the job because you take an oath to uphold the U.S. Constitution and the laws of the state of Nevada, and those are the things that would be controlled.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Ron Q. Kill. I'm also known as Ron Q. I own multiple businesses around here in Las Vegas. Question is for Mr. Sean Connell. You have mentioned earlier that you were involved in some veteran groups such as CARE. Could you elaborate that a little bit?
Yeah, it's an organization that was started in 2003 in Kentucky. It's called USA Cares. It's a national nonprofit. The individuals that started it used to work for Kroger grocery store, and following 9/11, they decided that they wanted to recognize the individuals that enlisted to defend our country. They started selling yard signs just in support of everyone that enlisted, raised about $100,000, and decided that one, they wanted to keep going, and two, they needed to find a way to distribute the funds to the individuals that it was raised in support of. So they formed this organization. They've started expanding around the country. I worked last year to open up the Nevada chapter. There's also chapters in San Diego and Phoenix that are being opened. I'm working with the West Coast Facilitator, I believe is her title, to help her open up those organizations. It is specifically dedicated to individuals that signed up following 9/11, but it provides food and housing assistance, jobs assistance, not actually finding them jobs, but if they get a job where they need to relocate, we cover the relocation costs. If they need specific tools for that job, we will purchase them. For instance, somebody who got hired to work as a helicopter mechanic but needed to supply their own tools, purchase the tools for them. So I've been involved in that organization since it first started in Nevada, I guess it was early last year.
Hi, my name is Michael Broadway. A couple of my questions have already been asked, so I'm just going to ask both of you your take on the Second Amendment.
Second Amendment right to bear arms. We obviously have a constitutional right to bear arms. We have to balance that with how the arms, what people are applying for licenses and making sure that they don't have mental health problems, that they would go out and commit some of the atrocious things that we've seen with school shootings. It's certainly federal government, and then the state has issues as well, but we absolutely have a right to bear arms. So I think the question's already answered by Second Amendment. So thank you.
I'm a very strong supporter of all of the constitutional amendments. I think that none of them should be more important than the others. I think that anyone who is going to advocate for free speech, to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, also should advocate for the right to keep and bear arms. I do recognize that we have the CCW requirements in Nevada, and I honestly don't think it's a bad idea for people to demonstrate proficiency if they're going to carry it, not necessarily from a legal standpoint, but just from a personal safety standpoint. But I do think that it's pretty clear that we have the right to keep and bear arms. I support that, and I get a little offended when people talk about the founding fathers could not have fathomed the technology and the advancements, and they couldn't have had an idea about the weapons that exist today. If they did, they wouldn't have written what they wrote. And that kind of ignores the fact that they were smart enough to build into the Constitution a way to amend it. So they did have the foresight to know that things would change. They couldn't predict the future, but they gave us the tools where, as a society, if we come together and decide that we want to amend the Constitution, we can. But until that happens, we have to uphold what's written.
Jason Stoffel. This is a question for Mr. Connell. Mr. Connell, how have you used your library and legal training to improve the lives of veterans, especially disabled veterans in Clark County?
I actually have spent a lot of time doing pro bono work for disabled veterans. There's an individual on the board with me at the charity. Name is Dr. Marvin Carter. He is a former POW and is a disabled Marine. He volunteers in a number of different veterans organizations and charities in town, and is associated with Veterans Outreach Program. He contacts me all the time with individuals he's working with that need some type of legal service, whether it's sitting down and talking to them about a charity that they're setting up, going over legal documents with them, or actually appearing on their behalf. Not sure if you're familiar, but the VA obviously being federal property, anybody has an incident there is for federal court as opposed to state court. There is no equivalent of the Nevada Veterans Court in federal court, and while a lot of these individuals that I've worked with have been charged with a petty offense or a low-level misdemeanor, the ramifications of that charge still impact them in ways that it might not impact other individuals. So the Federal Public Defender's Office does not provide a public defender, even if you qualify it, unless you're facing jail time. So, for instance, there was an individual that, because of the way the charge was written, he could have been forced to register as a sex offender and would have lost his veterans' housing benefits. The crime that he committed was not a sex offense, but the way it was written up, it could have been interpreted that way. So I worked with the investigator and negotiated on his behalf to try and get it so that he could undergo treatment, could do public service, and could plead to a lesser crime so that it wouldn't potentially cost him his housing benefits.
My name is Jason Smith. I'm the Vice Chair of the Libertarian Party of Nevada. And I'd like to say I've been on that side of these bright lights before, so I appreciate what you're going through and that you've come forward to answer these questions. So thank you. My question is a little bit nuanced, but answer it any way you feel comfortable. It is for both or whoever wants to answer. Bastiat, a French writer, said that when law and morality contradict each other, the citizen has the cruel alternative of either losing his respect for the law or losing his moral sense. Regarding this, the reason I am here is because Veterans in Politics took up a shooting that happened many years ago with a veteran, Stanley Gibson, excuse me. And it touched me when I got to see the outcry of the people saying that this was not right, this was immoral, this was not lawful. I actually saw a sheriff candidate sit where you're sitting and defend it. and it made me sick. So I have a certain slant when it comes to corruption and our government, and I'd like you to speak to your job and your role in justice when it comes to the people speaking out and being offended by the way legislation is used.
Sure, I'll go ahead and address that. The military and veteran is very personal to me because my nephew is a Marine. He just made the initial acceptance to MARSOC. My dad was in the Air Force, so I do the care packages. It's very personal, and when he's deployed, it's very hard on families, and it's very hard for them to be out in the military. And when they come back, we need to do a better job as a society to make sure that they are reintegrated and that they have the tools to operate in our society. I think with Stanley, and I know Veterans in Politics did a lot of work to expose what was occurring. You know, he was coming from the hospital. He was not able, from my understanding, it was not involved in the case on any level, so it's not a case that I have personal information on, either what I read in the news, what I hear people talking about, but he was confused about where his home was in that apartment complex, which is why he was going around and around. And those are some things that I talked about, that we need to make sure that the people that appear in front of us, that we understand who they are. If they're a veteran, if they have mental health problems, if they have addiction problems, you can't just punish people for those things. You need to make sure that we're addressing those things. And we need to make sure there's resources in society that they can go to, and we need to make sure that there are resources, but they're channeled to them, and create means for that they have that information. And I appreciate the work that Veterans in Politics and other organizations do to help veterans, because it's a significant issue. And there are veterans who are homeless and don't want to be integrated, and they're living on the street, and they're picking up a conviction after a conviction for being homeless, for urinating in public, consuming alcohol in public. We've got to address that as a society. And it's important for all of us individually and in the roles that we play in society to address those things. So I appreciate your concern, and thank you for the question.
I'm going to try and answer your question. Please let me know if I do not. But I am absolutely dedicated to justice, and it's something that I hold very high, and it's part of the reason I'm sitting here today. I think that we need to make sure that justice is served. There may be times when there are laws that conflict with our ideas of justice or morality, and I don't think it falls on the people that are sitting at this table. I think it falls on everybody in this room and everybody in this community to stand up and address that. Now, obviously, elected officials have a louder voice, and they need to take advantage of that, but I don't think that we can just throw laws aside because one person thinks they're unjust. But when we as a community get together and we put pressure on the legislature, or whether it's a constitutional issue on the courts, we need to make sure that through the proper channels, changes are made so that it's a better society going forward for everyone.
That will conclude our interview, and we appreciate your time, and so everybody round of applause for Sean Connell.
Thank you again for having me.
And Judge Saragosa is here for the next interview. Her opponent, Chelini, was not